right, there we go.
There we go.
Okay, so for those of you that don't know me, I am Amanda Bonilla. I serve as the Executive Director for Student Diversity, Equity, and Belonging in Systems Office for Ivy Tech. And part of our program offerings across the state is to have a Heritage Month speaker series celebrating diverse Hoosiers who are doing really critical work across our state. And so with us today, we have Kit Malone. Kit Malone, in her role as an advocacy strategist at the ACLU of Indiana, works closely with the team to plan and implement advocacy efforts across the spectrum of ACLU issues, areas, and campaigns. She also oversees the ACLU of Indiana's LGBTQ rights project. That includes TEEP, if I'm saying that correctly, Transgender Education and Advocacy Program, a public outreach effort to identify transgender advocates and arm them with the tools to educate and engage their communities and lawmakers. In her time at the ACLU of Indiana, Kit has been a leader in the effort to defeat numerous legislative attacks on the rights of queer and trans Hoosiers. In 2019, she was inducted into Indy Pride's Hall of Fame for this work, and in 2020 was named Community Leader of the Year by the Indy Rainbow Chamber of Commerce. And in 21, she won the Kennedy King Memorial Initiative's Trailblazer Award for civic engagement. A former high school teacher, gym teacher maybe, because we're talking about the picture. Kit started her advocacy career as a community organizer for the Freedom Indiana campaign. While there, she helped organize local battles to successfully pass non-discrimination protections in over 12 municipalities. Kit was instrumental in the development of Indy Pride's annual trans-focused event, #TransGlam, and co-organized the first transgender marching contingent in the Indy Pride's parade's history. Kit currently also serves as a member of the Indy's Race and Cultural Relations Leadership Network. So we are so grateful to have you here with us today, Kit. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and kick it over to you. So thanks for being here.
Amanda, thanks so much for that introduction. It's always bizarre to hear your own biography read out loud. If anybody else has had that experience, I know you can relate. But thanks. Look at this group of folks. Just a few notes. I brought some slides with me. I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of the state of LGBTQ rights here in Indiana and the history behind it. I've been lucky enough to be involved in a lot of that history, starting with the marriage battles in 2014. And it's been a real privilege to be able to get a front row seat to a lot of that. So thought it would be a good month to share that with all of you. Just some notes about my style. I don't know how formal these meetings are, but I'm a pretty casual person and I like for people to talk. As Amanda noted, I used to be a high school teacher, so it takes a lot to get me off track. So, I mean, that's not an invitation to try, but you can totally raise your hand or something. And I'm sure that Amanda or Amber or I, if we see that, I don't mind if you have a thought while I'm presenting. I generally prefer that to just sort of like reading slides to everyone. So if folks have questions, feel free to join in. And with that, I'm going to try to share my screen. All right, can everybody see that? It's not in here. We'll put that in presenter mode. Yes, that looks good. All right, folks can see that. So before I get started, does anybody know much about the American Civil Liberties Union and what we do? Feel free to jump in or raise your hand or something like that. Or just turn on your mic and speak up, because I can't really see everybody all at once because I have a tiny little laptop screen.
I'll be honest and say that I do not. So I want to learn.
Is that, I'm sorry, I could not see your name there because of my tiny little laptop screen.
It's okay, Abby.
Abby,
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Anybody have a hint for Abby before I take it? Just as a reminder, as a former teacher, that means I can wait an impossibly long time for an answer to a question that I ask. My heart will be broken if nobody can answer. Does that help? All right.
Sometimes I feel like this is the only organization that has our backs on, not to be trite, but civil liberties. Like, you guys are really looking at it in close detail.
Well, I appreciate that. Could you shout out your name, because I can't see you in the list here. I don't have enough screen space.
Toby. Hi, Toby Stark.
Toby, thank you for that. I would like to think that we are a big part of the network of folks who sort of have our backs. Certainly, we are the nation's sort of premier constitutional defense law firm and advocacy organization. So our role is to sue the government at times when the government overreaches its constitutional responsibilities and violates people's civil rights. That work includes really the whole spectrum of issues that you might consider civil rights issues, whether that is, fighting to reduce incarceration in the US, whether that is fighting for the rights of refugees. We're the organization that brought gay marriage to the country with the Obergefell decision. We, of course, famously, Ruth Bader Ginsburg started the Women's Rights Project here at the ACLU of Indiana. We are here in Indiana and in many other affiliates across the country. We serve as Planned Parenthood's lawyer in a number of cases defending women's reproductive rights and bodily autonomy. So all of it, the whole spectrum. It's really exciting to work at an organization where you don't have just one issue that is yours, but really you cover the waterfront and are sort of responsible for being, in many cases, sort of the moral voice in a room that says, like, this is where we stand in our values, and to be sort of empowered by an organization to do that work. We're also famous for a lot of free speech cases. One of my favorite times of year is approaching, and that is the holidays at the ACLU, because we are often known by people who don't enjoy the work that we do as sort of the ground zero of the war on Christmas, because we often take cases in which we are suing local governments for endorsing one religious viewpoint, famously, like by placing crosses on courthouse lawns and things like that. Always generates some really rough hate mail, which when I get hate mail here, I keep that in a little pride of place drawer in my office to let me know that I'm doing good in the world. I mean, that is, and also it would be funny, if folks knew the degree to which our office loves Christmas, generally speaking, I wonder if it would take some of the wind out of their sails, because we're all super Christmas people, ironically. Anyway, and our Christmas party is off the chain. This went in a Christmas direction. I don't know. That's where my heart is right now. But I'm going to move on a little bit, because I do want to talk to you a little bit about sort of the state of LGBTQ rights in Indiana. That's sort of my turf in the state as a long-term organizer. I'm going to open by giving us sort of the landscape as it stands now, and then take us through some of the eras. I don't want to but Amanda will give me some warnings as we get close to time, because I can be a really wordy person. So where we are right now is that Indiana has no statewide civil rights protections for LGBTQ people. We don't, unlike a lot of other states, we do not have any laws that specifically bar discrimination against people based on their sexual orientation or gender identity. Also, in Indiana, we attempted to pass a hate crimes bill in 2018. What came out of that doesn't actually meet the legal standard for what a hate crimes bill is, and specifically was written to exclude transgender people. We actually came out against that hate crimes bill for a number of reasons, mostly because it's simply, the Indiana statute is unconstitutional and probably unenforceable. Which we'll see if it is attempted, but also we as an organization that opposes incarceration, we oppose measures that would increase incarceration of people for any reason. So we don't back criminal laws of any kind. So that's where we are now. Now, whenever I say this, I also want to be a little bit careful. Like, Indiana does not bar discrimination. That's true. That does not mean that discrimination is legal. Recently, we've had a lot of wins, including one of the Supreme Court last year in the Bostock case. I'll talk about that in a sec. That really confirmed that there are the current civil rights law as it exists already definitely applies to LGBTQ people. And we'll talk a little bit about why that's true. But what we can see is that we have a sort of a confusing patchwork. Some municipalities here in Indiana have local ordinances that protect LGBTQ people from discrimination. And we just have this situation where people can be unsure of what their rights are, depending on where in the state they are or where in the country they are. There's a lot of confusion, which means this is something we really need to clear up. Nationally, the Trump administration was really famously attempted to roll back a lot of progress that was made on the LGBTQ rights front, particularly targeting transgender people. Famously issued guidance to the Department of Education, the Departments of Health and Human Services, the Department of Justice, and the HUD, really instructing them on how they could find legal ways to discriminate against specifically targeting trans people in things like shelters and medical care. That guidance has been rapidly reversed by Biden really quickly. So this new administration has come in, and we're in a position where, again, the federal government is saying, no, civil rights law applies to LGBTQ Americans. The DOJ is now even participating in lawsuits to protect trans students under Title IX in several states. So that's great to hear. But it also underscores a problem that we have now where, again, whether or not LGBTQ people have rights not only differs based on where you are, but depending on what administration is currently in power and how they interpret civil rights law and recent court findings. So it's not an ideal situation. It's great to have an administration that supports the rights of LGBTQ people, but we definitely need a more permanent solution. We had a win in the Supreme Court that I mentioned. That's Bostock v. Clayton County. Did anybody hear about that? Did anybody follow any of that in June of, actually it was 2019? Gosh, pandemic time, it's weird. Well, just really quick, it was a huge win for gay and trans people. It confirmed it was a group of folks who had been fired from their jobs for being gay and trans. Their cases were rolled together. The court found pretty roundly that no, the discriminating against someone because they are LGBTQ is fundamentally legally the same as sex discrimination. So and sex discrimination is covered under civil rights law. The reasoning being that, say, if you fire someone because they are a man married to a man, what you are doing is firing them because of your sex-based idea of what people who you think of as men are supposed to be doing, and that is basic, straightforward sex discrimination. And similar reasoning applies to trans people, and applied in that case, Bostock. So that really sort of enshrined this idea in the courts that civil rights law applies to LGBTQ people, even though gender identity and sexual orientation aren't specifically written into that law that was, that's been in effect since 1964. Huge win. We're seeing spillover into all kinds of areas where this interpretation is really starting to gain favor in the courts. Private religious providers still have a wide leeway to discriminate. And states across the country in response to this are rapidly moving legislation to overtly restrict the rights of trans people. We see this in bans on trans people getting access to medical care, bans on trans people participating in school sporting events, and just a whole slew of other stuff. Indiana, we see anywhere from 2 to 5 anti-trans bills filed every single year. So that's been since about 2017, 2016. So definitely this is an area where those attack bills are growing. I want to talk a little bit about the Equality Act. You've all heard about this. I'm sure. The brief version of what the Equality Act is, it is yet to pass. It was of course passed by the House, but it needs to be taken up by the Senate. It's not moving quickly because of all the problems that we're all familiar with. If we follow the news in the Senate. The Equality Act would amend the 1964 Civil Rights Act to expressly include gender identity and sexual orientation. This would be great. And the reason for that is even though we have that great Supreme Court victory, we don't have that written into law. That would write that into law and make it far harder for courts that don't agree with the jurisprudence that SCOTUS used could not really overturn that very easily. It'd be far harder to overturn that right in individual areas. It would still preserve the ministerial exemption, which means that like churches who have employees who perform ministerial roles are allowed to only hire people who follow their religious dictates. But it would prevent them from doing things like not allowing trans people in their shelter. It would prevent them from saying, well, we're going to fire our janitor because they're trans, that sort of thing. Unfortunately, like a lot of situations here, the push for the Equality Act has really provoked a backlash against trans people. Trans people have been sort of identified by the opponents of this legislation as something that Americans still don't understand very well and an easy target for fear mongering. In 2021, nearly half of US states filed legislation restricting the rights of trans people. A lot of those bills have gone into effect. Trans youth in particular are our current wedge issue in that national debate, where we're seeing trans youth in high schools being targeted for exclusion from school activities like sports. And we're seeing out and out bans on any and all affirming care, medical care for trans youth, which is causing untold heartache in families that live in the states where those bans, like Arkansas, are going into effect. Religious refusal is also gaining ground, which is this idea that you have a religious right to discriminate against trans people. Maybe if you were a teacher at a public school, you have the right to misgender or dead name one of your trans students because of your religious beliefs. You don't really have a religious right to discriminate in that way, especially if you're a public employee. But that is a concept that folks are waving around, just as they did during the gay marriage era, that somehow if LGBTQ people have equal rights expressly written into law, that means that ministers will be required to who knows what this parade of horrors of things that you'll be forced to do if this passes that aren't really true. But the rhetoric has resulted in a massive increase in harassment and violence. 2021 has already broken every previous year's records for homicides against trans people that we know about. So those kinds of things really, the kind of fear mongering really has an unfortunate result in our community. I also want to take a note. If you live in Indiana, you may have heard about this. It's been happening all over the country, but it's definitely been happening here. School boards are emerging as a sort of a new front in this fight against LGBTQ equality, along with issues like CRT, that is the critical race theory debate, mask wearing, and gender identity have all been sort of rolled together in the way that people are coming into these school boards, making demands of schools. That's happening in Indiana and across the country. It's really part of a coordinated far-right campaign. And the crowds attending these meetings are doing things like demanding the removal of books that depict trans people positively. And they're targeting, school policies that may ask school officials to use the correct names and pronouns for students and that sort of thing. So very scary. And unfortunately for me, as someone who's I'm very interested in public service. I think civil service is and doing our civic duty is so important. And in Indiana, most of our school boards are volunteer boards, and they're generally nonpartisan. And to see these people who just really want to make their schools better sort of be targeted by campaigns of harassment and violence, in some cases, people have brought guns to these meetings, published school board members' address on the internet. I just feel really bad because I think we want sober people who care about their local schools in these school board meetings, and I'm afraid it's driving a lot of people who just want to improve their school right on out of the business of volunteering to do that work. So that's really a really sad outgrowth of all of this. So that was a lot. I want to talk a little bit about the history of the last decade or so in Indiana, but does anybody have questions before I go on? Right on. Okay.
I don't see anything in the chat and I don't see any hand raised. So I think we're good to keep going.
Thanks, Amanda. So let's get in the Wayback Machine and take her back to 2014. That is when Indiana passed HJR 3, which banned recognition of gay marriage. That provoked just really a massive protest and outcry. I remember being part of it. It was so exciting. It was really, this was the time that I was first getting involved in LGBTQ activism in Indiana. I was just a little baby queer. I wasn't even out as a trans person yet at that point. But just really exciting to see such a backlash in a state that I didn't expect it to happen in. Massive protest. Federal courts eventually declared that ban unconstitutional, thanks to a suit brought by us, the ACLU. I didn't work here, so I don't really get to take credit for it, but I will. The ACLU brought that suit, struck down the ban. And in 2015, the Supreme Court confirmed in the Obergefell case that gay marriages are constitutionally protected across the country. So what that means is that Indiana had legal gay marriage a year before the rest of the country did. So, pat us on the back for that one. Does anybody remember where they were when gay marriage was declared legal? I always ask this. Sometimes people have really amazing stories about this. Well, I'll tell you mine.
In the chat, it says, I was at the city county building in line with my now husband.
Heck yeah, that was nuts. That was such an awesome scene. Which city county building?
Indy.
Yeah, the Indianapolis City County building was amazing. People did line up. The city county clerk threw open the doors and helped everybody get registered. It was just such like a great, like warm and happy moment. I remember watching, so I was teaching high school at a very rural, very conservative area when that happened. And I saw all of my friends online posting pictures of themselves. So many people that I knew who had planned on getting married, going to getting married. Maybe some people who hadn't planned on getting married like a little too quickly. But like generally speaking, it was an awesome celebration. So
and one other comment that says, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my gay brother-in-law. We cried.
Oh man, that's adorable. I love that. I love that. So that takes me to RFRA. I don't know if anybody remembers RFRA, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Indiana, again, really like leading the charge in bigotry. This became a model law that a lot of states around the country tried. Which is to sort of couch enshrining what discrimination can look like into like the language of defending religious freedom. This idea that what we are doing is we're not making it legal to discriminate against gay people. We're simply saying that you have the religious freedom to do so. There's not a lot of constitutional merit to the argument that you have the right to sort of discriminate in the public square against people. But we passed it. And again, also, shout out to then Gov Mike Pence. That was little baby Mike Pence before he was the man we know today. Going on TV. I remember being interviewed on national TV and being asked if the intention of RFRA was to discriminate against LGBTQ people, and him just being completely unable to say yes or no. which really revealed what it was all about to the whole country. And again, it provoked a massive public outcry. Nobody liked the idea. Indiana's business community in particular were really, really pissed. I remember this headline in the Star, this Fix This Now page. It was the entire front page of the Star coming out. Business after business, including most of our large national level businesses, threatened to remove their operations from Indiana if they passed it. And ordinary Hoosiers got together and demanded that the RFRA be fixed. And that is what happened. Lawmakers produced what they call a fix. And that fix essentially, like, RFRA is actually still in state code, but the fix clarified that RFRA could not be used to discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. What's fun about this is that that also means that that's the first time gender identity and sexual orientation were allowed to be written into state code. Lawmakers had blocked us from getting that when for years and years and years, but there it is. So that's the first appearance of those words in state code. And it also ensured that RFRA could not be used to undermine cities and towns that had already outlawed discrimination, because that's pretty important. The year following that, I worked on this campaign, the Freedom Indiana campaign in 2016, to try to take that momentum we had from fixing RFRA and winning that battle, and try to actually pass affirmative non-discrimination. We got so close, but in the end, lawmakers, Indiana's supermajority conservative lawmakers refused to take action on it. We had a statewide coalition of business leaders, activists, faith leaders from all stripes, and plenty of other organizations that united to push for a statewide law. The upside to all of that is that even though it didn't pass, during that work, I was able to work with towns and cities across the state. And we passed about 14 new non-discrimination ordinances in Indiana. We're actually now, because of that work, the state with the most local city, town, county non-discrimination ordinances of any state in the United States. So that's kind of interesting. Following that, in 2019, just after years of work on this, Indiana passed a statute that attempted to address hate crimes. Unfortunately, this bill very specifically and publicly excluded trans people, and Indiana's bill's language renders it unconstitutional and probably unenforceable. That also provoked a backlash against trans people, since the debate about the hate crimes bill really was about the inclusion of trans people. Multiple lawmakers tried to file legislation to ban trans people from being able to update their gender identity documents at the same time. The controversy has kind of continued. For a moment, we had gender neutral driver's licenses here in Indiana, in good old Indiana, but that controversy really held that up in a kind of legal limbo, where it has remained for a couple of years. Since 2015, trans people have remained sort of the target du jour of anti-LGBTQ law in Indiana. Multiple bills targeting the rights of trans people have been filed every single year. Luckily, due in large part to the work we do as lobbyists and with our trans advocates, none of those bills have moved forward. We've been able to kill them all, which makes us unique among conservative states with legislative supermajorities. We do a really good job of making sure with our coalition leaders and our years of outreach to the legislature that these bills don't move forward. I think the remembering of how bad RFRA was also causes a lot of legislators to think twice before passing them. But we still see attempts to ban student athletics, bathroom bills, bans on changing ID docs, and bans on affirming care for youth. We've seen those all in the last 2 years. We're the only organization here at the ACLU that defends trans people in the legislature in Indiana. Our biggest focus is on empowering community leaders. My TEAP program brings together leaders from all over the state and districts, really in some of the most far-flung rural regions, We teach them how to do legislative advocacy. We power them up as lobbyists. We give them support to do work in their home communities and introduce them to lawmakers, and really do everything we can to sort of empower them as leaders to do that kind of work. And that's us. There's some things you can do to get involved. And I sort of blew through that, but I've got all kinds of time for questions now, if folks have it. That's sort of where we've been here in Indiana for 5 or 6 years, and you know, hopefully a little bit about where we're going. So I'm going to turn off the screen share so that I can see your faces. I think there we go.
All right, so if you have questions, you can put them in the chat, or if you want to raise your hands, we're happy to answer either way.
We do have one question, Amanda, in the chat.
Was I a part of the birth certificate case? Kim, you'll have to clarify. I've been a part of a number of cases involving gender identity documents.
You're welcome to unmute, Kim, if that's easier. Not a problem.
Oh, yes, we have been a part of that. Although we are not the lead role on that particular case. That is, I think it's Lambda. I think it's Lambda Legal that is the law firm that is handling that case. We have worked with them on it as well. And yeah, I mean, that attack is insane to see, and doesn't stand a lot of chance of moving forward. But it's frightening. It's frightening to see that that's still happening, and that we have an attorney general really that would be willing to defend such a as removing, not allowing same-sex parents to have, you know, parenthood listed on their child's birth certificate. It just seems so regressive.
I have a question. Can you actually talk a little bit more about, you mentioned about the school board and kind of what's happening there for people that are volunteering, and I'd be curious to know, like, your perspective, how we can support those individuals that are volunteering their time with school board, or, you know, what could we as citizens do to help in that area, particularly as it relates to the school systems?
Well, it's been, the politics around these school board flaps are really, really interesting. If you were to ask me personally as a strategist, just generally, I think this is a case in which the opposition has overplayed their hand. You know, when I've done work in local government, which has been a lot, you know, as an activist, as an advocate, as a lobbyist, our watchword has always been be respectful. You know, these people volunteer their time, or at, you know, even at city councils, those are not high paying jobs. Those people aren't taking it for the money. They're doing it generally because they want to be public servants at those low level municipal public service jobs. So I do think that in some cases, the sort of like rabid politicization of those meetings, sort of coming in and screaming and yelling and threatening, physically threatening folks, really works against them in a lot of ways. No matter what sort of the political stance those school board members might have personally. I think it really nobody wants to be threatened. No one wants to feel like their family is threatened, that their address is going to be posted on social media for folks to come to their homes. I think that, so I think one of the best things we can do as citizens is to thank our school board members, is to let them know that there are people in the community that appreciate their service. You know, there's often a way to, you know, send them an email just to let them know that you know it's a hard time. If you see that sort of thing is erupting in your local community, and that you appreciate that they take the time to serve the school. I think that that does a lot for for public servants to just know that, because mostly, school board members really only hear from the public when they're very mad about something the school is doing, not really when the school is doing something right. I also think that another thing that you can do is support student advocacy. I think that in schools, particularly the voices of students in school board workings are often erased. And they become really more about what the parents and the adults in the communities want. Youth voices are really important, particularly on, I think, issues around, the issues that have been coming up in these school board meetings are critical race theory, quote unquote, and gender identity and masks. And these are the three things that we see coming up more and more and more than most of the other issues. There seem to be the issues that are sort of uniting the far right in terms of what they think of as sort of quote unquote liberalism gone mad, and what they're able to use to sort of gin up these sort of angry crowds. I think that the giving youth opportunities and empowering them to go to their school boards and to speak their truth during these times is really important. Particularly youth who are, a lot of these meetings are happening in like semi-conservative donut counties around Indiana, where a lot of the youth there might feel alone if they're a member of a minority group, whether they're LGBTQ, whether they're from a family of immigrants, whether they're Black or brown. There's a lot of those kids will kind of feel like they're in a school that doesn't serve them and in a community that doesn't serve them. And that authenticity, I think the adults, in my experience of sort of preparing advocates to speak to people who are in positions of power, that authenticity does a better job of changing hearts and minds than almost anything else. Oh, Amanda, that's really awesome. Yeah, I hope you do. That's really great.
Did you capture Abby's question?
I was just going to say, yeah, there's a question in the chat. How do we get involved in supporting the ACLU? What ways can we support?
Hell yeah, Abby. So I'll give you all the standard stuff. You can, of course, go to our website. There's ways to donate and to sign up for our mailing lists. I would also follow us on social media if I were you. Do not be afraid to sign up for our mailing list. You don't have to donate any money to do that. We do not spam people with like requests for donations. That's not what we use those mailing lists for. We use those mailing lists to send out action alerts, typically more often during Indiana's legislative session, but often throughout the year, about real, actual, present threats to civil rights in Indiana. So, and we include in those action alerts sort of individualized ways you can show up. That might be attending a rally, that might be a letter writing party, that might be simply sending a letter to your lawmakers on a specific issue. But that is a great way to keep in touch with our work and to get involved. There's also a volunteer form there if you're interested in volunteering for us. We love our volunteers. It's been a weird year or two for volunteers. We haven't had as many opportunities because a lot of the times a volunteer opportunity is, helping us set up or table at one of the events that we're hosting, which is always a lot of fun. And you get to hang out with my advocacy crew. Our advocacy crew is always the most fun. We're the best part of the ACLU. We're like the cheerleading squad. So highly recommend getting involved in that as we start to come out of this pandemic. There should be more opportunities to volunteer.
Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Abby. Looks like some folks are joining the email list, so that's great. And then there's a question comment here. It says, thank you, Kit. As a trans person, it can be difficult to hear about the work that is happening to ensure me and people like me have less rights. What advice do you have for Ivy Tech to support our transgender students and employees who may be going through the same and have come to class or work and have to act like everything is normal?
Kyle, trans person to trans person, thank you for that question. I think that is something we all feel. I know that I do. Like how do I come back to work? Sort of knowing that there's a coordinated national campaign to erase me from public life. So I think what I'm supposed to say here is that Ivy Tech should have affirming policies, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, Ivy Tech should. But I think more importantly, you know, if a community wants to support trans people, or sort of living through this really particular moment in time where we are really one of the lead in, you know, we're one of the lead players in the anti-LGBTQ movement's cast of horribles, and we're, you know, our image is painted everywhere in really unflattering terms by people who don't really know anything about us. We feel like there's a target on our back basically everywhere we go. I think that any community, a way to do that is to make space for us to be ourselves, and to have to see ourselves in the people who lead us, to know that we have colleagues, friends, people who we work for, professors, so that it's not, you know, I love an LGBTQ center, I love student groups, but I think the things that make me feel the most comforted as a trans person in the work is when I see people like me succeeding in being brought into decision-making positions. And, you know, I love that. And I think that that is something that always gives me some comfort, to know that there are people like me who are experiencing the same things that I'm experiencing. They're doing things like setting the policies that I have to live by every day, as opposed to people who probably won't ever know that. I do think that also simple things like, you know, making space for instance, transgender events like TDOR will be coming up next month. Often universities will have, you know, event. TDOR, by the way, for those who don't know, is the Transgender Day of Remembrance. Fair warning, every transgender sort of day is super depressing. The Transgender Day of Remembrance is a day that we remember all of the trans people, mostly trans women of color, mostly Black trans women who have been murdered in the previous year. That's always a tough day, but also kind of a day that we can come together, often as a community. And so I think providing those spaces to have community is I know that, Kyle, I feel like I'm talking all over this issue, so I hope that this is satisfying. I know it is hard. But I know that the thing that has sort of gotten me through the onslaught of the past 5 years is my community. Is the fact that I have a community, that I have people who are going through the same thing as me, that I can talk to, or not talk to, and like just go play, you know, kickball with or whatever. Like, just having that community is important. I always feel so sarcastic just sipping my like hot beverage, like while I'm waiting for a question, like, hi, come on.
So anonymous question around, what does transgender mean? So talked about the term, we talked about legislation around it, but understanding the difference between transgender and the other letters and the
Well, it's been a while since I've done sort of the 101 of what transgender means, but I appreciate the question. A transgender person is someone whose lived gender is not the gender that people assumed it was when they were born. So, you know, in the case of a woman who is transgender, that is someone who everyone probably assumed was a boy when she was born, but it turned out she was a woman. And that's the simplest way that I can put it.
All right, we've got time for a few more questions. If you want them to be anonymous, that's fine. You can directly send them to me. I'm happy to put them out there anonymously as well. So Okay, and then I have a question.
Sure.
So recognizing that Indiana is has a lot of rural areas across the state, and you mentioned about folks, either trans youth or other young people that identify from marginalized communities, that may not have as much access to resources and support that maybe young people in the cities do, be it Indy or maybe Lake County or something. So how can we, because again, we've got campuses all across the state and folks from all across the state, how can we help provide support or move initiatives forward or get involved in those more rural, less accessible areas?
So this is going to be a wonky answer, but the most powerful thing that I have personally seen in my years as a community organizer has been the lowly GSA. Does anybody know what I'm talking about a GSA? Does anybody know has anybody ever been a member of a GSA? I see Kim nodding that head. Who knows what a GSA is? Who wants to explain it to the group? I see Gay Straight Alliance, right? It's a student club. You see them at both K-12 schools and universities. Sometimes nowadays, Gay Straight is what most people say, Gay Straight Alliance. Some people are starting to move to like Gender Sexuality Alliance to sort of recognize that it's not just about gay and straight anymore, but like whatever you want to call it, we generally just say like GSA. But it's essentially a student club for LGBTQ students that can be run at a school. And what we often see is that schools in rural areas will be very reticent about allowing students to start them. Unfortunately for them, students have a constitutional right to start one. We consistently, when we're in the middle of a lawsuit right now, we consistently win our lawsuits against schools who try to prevent students from forming these GSA clubs, because those schools often have like a fellowship of Christian athletes. They often have, the constitutional argument is that if you allow students to have clubs about shared interests that are not curricular, then you cannot pick and choose other than like danger to the school. Like if it's not a club around something, like you can't really start the Nazi club because you can make a pretty good argument that the Nazi club would be a danger to students at the school. If you can't make that argument that the students would be, that the school environment would be endangered by that, then you have to allow them. And there really isn't an argument, a constitutional argument that GSAs create a dangerous environment at a school. In fact, there's a whole lot of evidence that they make schools safer. So we consistently win those fights. But I have noticed over the years that that in places where these GSAs form, other things start to happen. In places where GSAs form and they're supported and they last for a while, you'll see the culture of the school change. And as the culture of the school changes, the culture of the community changes a little bit too. A lot of the places where, Indiana in the past 2 years has had this really interesting moment where all of these rural communities are starting to have things like pride festivals, like small town pride festivals. And almost every one of those communities sprung from a place where there was an active GSA that really sort of fed the community there. Does that make some sense? That would be like one of my favorite things to do. It's like support the youth at all times, and specifically like supporting them in those public school environments where they can get together and make sort of plans and sort of change their school's culture from the inside. I have a private question here to me about explaining RFRA a little bit more. I think that generally speaking, RFRA was a law that is now essentially a nothing burger. It's essentially been turned around, that attempted to provide a carve out for private private organizations or individuals working in public organizations to discriminate or refuse service to people based on the fact that they are gay or transgender. So you could say if you were You would be able to say, well, I work here at the county clerk's office, but because I don't believe that gay people should be allowed to get married, I will not be filling out this form to allow them to get married. Someone else will have to do that, or they won't be able to get it done. Or I run a bakery in downtown Indy, and I would like to not sell cupcakes to any gay people. And if they tell me they're gay, I will not sell them a cupcake. And you would have the right to do that under RFRA. You could basically hang a no gays allowed sign or a no trans people allowed sign in your window under RFRA. Luckily, we were able to fix that, so it's not really, that's not a law anymore that is valid. I hope that clears it up a little bit. The next one that I have here is, are there key resources that you direct people to that helps in having conversations with friends and family who do not understand transgender issues like correct bathroom, language, etc.? Yes, and I relate. You mentioned they're having that debate with family who don't get it. The organization that I think it does the best job of providing these resources is GLAAD, GLAAD. Go to their website. They have a bunch of great explainers. You can just search for like Transgender 101 or something like that. They do an incredible job of sort of providing this in bite-sized, easy chunks. I will also say that when changing hearts and minds of family and people, the sort of best way to do that is interpersonal contact. We know this statistically, like people tend to have better, this is what fed the eventual rise and win of marriage. When people had direct contact with gay people, suddenly they seemed less scary, and so knowing people who are gay, knowing people who are transgender, having meaningful friendships and relationships with them is the best marker for someone's positive attitudes about those groups.
All right, so it looks like Amber and I are on the same wavelength. We put some links in the chat for the GLAAD resources that you just mentioned. So that's a great question too, just kind of where to direct people. All right, so we've got a few minutes left. Kid, if there was one thing that you hoped Ivy Tech students, staff, and faculty take away from the conversation today, what would that be?
Okay, this is the one takeaway that I would give, and that something that I like to stress whenever I teach people about activism and advocacy on really any issue, but I want to talk about the trans issue particularly because that is really the issue du jour here at the LGBT Rights Project, and really where the fight is in Indiana on LGBTQ issues is, I would say that people want to change the world, and they want to change the world we are programmed by the sort of capitalist society that we live in to believe that changing the world happens in like one place, that like you win a court case or you pass a law. And this feels weird for me to say as someone whose job is winning court cases and passing laws. But I want to say that the best way to make a difference in the world is to, be yourself loudly and be willing to listen to everybody and to expect to be listened to and to sort of engage the world with an open heart. Trans people are not going to be liberated. Even if we pass the Equality Act, it would do some great things for us, but discrimination would still exist. We passed the 1964 Civil Rights Act in 1964. And, pro tip, racism still exists. You can't fix those large scale societal problems with a law. You can address them and you can address some things about them. But if you want to sort of change the world, sort of change yourself, examine where you live, examine what your friend group looks like, Examine if you have meaningful relationships with all kinds of people. Like, don't go out and find yourself a trans friend. Like, that's not really the takeaway here. I will totally be your friend. Like, don't get me wrong. But I think that, like, think about like how you can expose yourself to the world in different ways, and how, because like those changes have to begin with us. If we're going to change like the material conditions of minorities, then we need to be proximate to people. We need to be in, in community in a real and meaningful way. And right now, I think really, especially in the Midwest, we are often not in community with people who don't live and look like us. And that is what prevents us from solving these big issues, not the lack of a law or a good case. It's that community membership. So I've been lucky to be able to find that community membership, but we need it. We need to get to that place, because we will not solve these big, huge debates. They'll go on forever and ever and ever until people feel like their actual lives and their actual fate is bound up in the fate of their neighbors. And right now we live in this very individualized capitalist world that says, no, 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 you get yours and you move on. And that's not really how the world works. Sorry, that was a lot, but there's my prologue or my epilogue.
No, I think it's perfect. I think that last part, that line, I think was really powerful of getting around people that are different from you, and getting away from this kind of individualistic idea of only being surrounded by the folks that look like you or share the same values. So I loved that. Thank you so much, Kit. I don't know if there's any last burning questions. Otherwise, we've kind of reached the end of our time together today. Excuse me. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and all of the work that you do for the state and for advocacy. We are so grateful that you spent some time with us today. And for those of you that are on the call, this is being recorded. We do have a pronouns program coming up for this month. I'll give Amber 2 seconds to plug that. We also have coming up for next month, for Native American Heritage Month, another speaker that will take place. So be on the lookout for that. As always, all of our programs and offerings are on the Ivy Tech Diversity website. So visit that for more information. But thank you again, Kit, for sharing your knowledge and time. And we're really grateful for that for you.
Thanks for having me.
Mm-hmm. Amber, you want to plug that program real quick for us before we get off the call?
Yeah, we have an Ivy Tech employee actually going to lead a pronouns one-on-one talk for if you're an employee of Ivy Tech on the call, then that discussion is for you. I have the link, the registration link in the chat a couple times. So please register for that. It's going to be a good conversation. Just continuing the conversation that we've started last week and then today and tomorrow.
All right. Thanks again, everyone. Take care and have a great rest of your day.
Bye, all.
Bye.